Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We are here today to talk about migration, specifically how Azure Migrate can help you migrate your data center to Azure. My name is Abhishek Hemrajani. I'm the Group Program Manager for Azure Migrate and Movere. Over the course of the next 30 minutes, I'm going to show you a variety of new features that we are announcing. These will really help you accelerate your migration to Azure. But before we get started, let's talk a little bit about migration and what Azure is doing to help you migrate to Azure on your own terms. Our philosophy with the Azure platform and our migration tooling is that you should be able to optimize on cost and resources as part of your migration process. We also realize that hybrid is a permanent state for our customers, and we want you to be secure and resilient across your hybrid environments. And finally, we also realize migration is a great opportunity to scale your applications and workloads, and our investments in the platform and the tooling allow you to do that. Now, clearly, this is an unprecedented year on a variety of vectors. We are seeing migration starting to accelerate for a variety of very time-sensitive reasons. Customers, as they start supporting a remote working model, are also using the opportunity to move the applications that back those remote working models to Azure. Our customers are realizing that the cost efficiencies and resource constraints on-prem just don't make sense anymore, and cloud is the right place to be. Cybersecurity threats are best mitigated when you run in a cloud like Microsoft Azure. When a large portion of your workforce is no longer working on site, that same on-site, on-premises data center starts becoming fragile, and customers are realizing that and using that as an opportunity to migrate to Azure. And finally, while there is slowdown in some industries, a lot of businesses are also accelerating, and meeting that surge demand is best met when you are in Azure. So what that's translating into is a variety of migration projects starting to accelerate. Of course, customers are migrating Windows Server and SQL Server to Azure, but customers are also migrating Linux and other open source databases to the cloud. We are seeing customers who now run their dev test only in Azure. We are also seeing migration of web apps, VDI, and purpose-built migration scenarios such as for VMware Dedicated, SAP, NetApp, and Oracle. Now, to help accelerate these migration projects, we are making investments across the spectrum of the migration program. And for us, the migration program is about the process, the programmatic offerings, and our product capabilities. So when it comes to the process, Microsoft's well-architected framework, which is part of the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework, is your go-to resource. That's proven guidance that can help you accelerate your migration projects. When it comes to the program, you should know about the Azure Migration Program and our Fast Track for Azure engineering team. That's best practices and resources, including Azure engineering and specialized migration partners that can truly help you scale your migration initiatives. And when it comes to product, Azure Migrate is our primary tooling for migration, but we are also heavily investing in Azure Arc and Azure Lighthouse to make it easy for you to manage your hybrid and cloud resources. Now, Azure Migration Program is built on top of proven methodology, and that proven methodology is the Cloud Adoption Framework for Azure. Azure Migration Program is a great way to migrate to Azure and benefit from cost-effective offers and incentives. We also help you with technical skill building. We include free tools like Azure Migrate. You have in-depth assistance from Fast Track and our specialized partners. Now, when it comes to Azure Arc and Azure Lighthouse, you have the ability and the power now to bring Azure services and management to any infrastructure. This could be extending server and Kubernetes management to any cloud, a consolidated toolset and complex governance across complex environments, brings you the ability to extend Azure Lighthouse security and visibility to hybrid and multi-cloud environments. You can also extend Azure management and Azure cloud practices to your on-premises. These are great tools that you should be using today. Now, this conversation is about migration, and migration, when it comes to us, is about Azure Migrate. Azure Migrate is the hub for data center migration. Now, when we built Azure Migrate, we built it around 4 key principles. Azure Migrate is where you should find your key scenarios that you're looking to execute your migration projects on. Azure Migrate also makes sure that for every scenario, we offer integrated discovery, assessment, and migration tooling. Azure Migrate is built by Microsoft and it's extensible with our integrated ISV partners. And finally, Azure Migrate, and specifically the Azure Migrate project, is now the centralized migration repository, which provides you end-to-end tracking and visibility into your migration initiatives. Let's talk a little about what key migration scenarios you should be able to execute with Azure Migrate. You have coverage for migrating Windows and Linux. These could be virtualized Windows and Linux machines running on VMware or Hyper-V or on AWS or GCP, or you could migrate bare metal environments to Azure. You have coverage for SQL and other databases. You can migrate your on-prem storage and data over to cloud with Azure Data Box. You can migrate on-prem VDI to Windows Virtual Desktop Services in Azure, and you can also migrate your on-prem web apps to Azure App Service or to containers in Azure Kubernetes Service. Now, when it comes to migration, the phase that is the most important is discovery and assessment. In fact, if there's any takeaway you can take from this session, it is that you should be prioritizing discovery and assessment. And to help you prioritize and execute on discovery and assessment, we focus very extensively on our discovery and assessment features in Azure Migrate. Azure Migrate's discovery and assessment is built for scale. You can scale from tens to thousands of virtual machines at one go. These could be VMware or Hyper-V or AWS or GCP VMs. You can also generate migration readiness assessments in Azure Migrate. These will help you understand if your workloads are suitable for cloud migration. How can you right size or optimize them as part of the migration process? And what would your cost projection be once you start executing the migrations? I'm super happy to announce key new features in Azure Migrate's discovery and assessment capability. Support for physical server discovery and the discovery for AWS and GCP VMs is now generally available. If you have data available from a CMDB export, you can directly import it into Azure Migrate. That feature is now generally available as well. And the feature that customers really love, our Agentless Dependency Mapping for VMware, is now seeing significant scale enhancement. Our scale is now 10 times what it used to be before. You can now perform Agentless Dependency Mapping for VMware for 1,000 virtual machines at once. How cool is that? Now, when it comes to performing migration, of course, you can migrate SQL and other databases and web apps. But when it comes to server migration, you can migrate pretty much from any environment to Azure. These could be VMware VMs, Hyper-V VMs, physical bare metal servers, or VMs in other public clouds. You can migrate them over to Azure with Azure Migrate. You can perform non-production impacting test migration that allows you to build confidence in your migration plan before you actually decide to execute it. When it comes to the actual cutover, you get zero data loss and pretty much no downtime as you perform the migration. And again, for our VMware Agentless Migration feature, which customers really love, I'm excited to announce multiple new features. You can now migrate to availability zones and ensure that the availability options of your workloads are met as part of the migration process. You can now also migrate Generation 2 virtual machines with UEFI boot over to Azure. As part of the Azure migration process, we will now install the Azure agent automatically on your Windows and Linux virtual machines. That comes really handy when you want to turn on management on your workloads as part of the migration process. And I know customers have been anxiously waiting for it. PowerShell support for agentless VMware migration is now also generally available. And finally, you can migrate large disks up to 32 terabytes with Azure Migrate. Now, that's basically all the investments that we are making to help you accelerate your migration. But I like to show you stuff in action. So I'm going to show you 3 key demos that will show you all of these great features in action. In the first demo, I'm going to show you our enhanced onboarding process, the ability to create an assessment for Azure VMware solution, but a very important feature that will help you understand how you should be planning your migration and for which workloads. In my second demo, I will show you the at-scale feature that is now releasing for our agentless dependency mapping. And in my third demo, I will show you the new replication features. So with that, I'm going to jump over to my browser and start showing you these features in action. So in this first demo, I'm going to show you our enhanced onboarding experience. I'll show you how to perform a discovery, how to create your first assessment, and then I'm going to show you a utility that will help you understand the different assessment options you have and which migration projects you should be executing first. So here's my Azure portal. When you go to the Azure portal the first time, you discover migration scenarios. These are scenarios like migrating Windows and Linux virtual machines, SQL and other databases, Or you could also explore more scenarios and you'll find coverage for web apps and VDI. I'm going to start off by performing an assessment, rather a discovery for my Windows and Linux virtual machines running in a VMware environment. Now, since this is the first time I'm using Azure Migrate, I get the option of creating an Azure Migrate project. An Azure Migrate project is a metadata repository that you get to place in a subscription, a resource group, and more importantly, in a geography of your choice. So if you have data sovereignty constraints, you can specify the geography that you want us to use when we place your metadata. I'm going to start off by creating it in a subscription. I'm going to call my resource group Ignite project. I'm going to call my Migrate project Ignite project demo, and I'm going to stick with the United States to place my metadata repository. Now, if you've used Azure Migrate before, you would have realized by now that the creation of the project has now been made one click. You simply click on create and your project is created and you're ready to start performing a discovery. Now, when you perform a discovery, you get the option of discovering your on-premises VMware environments, your Hyper-V environments. You can also discover bare metal servers or VMs in AWS or GCP. And as I mentioned before, if you have data available in a CMDB export, you can import it directly into Azure Migrate and create your migration readiness assessments. In this case, I'm going to discover my on-prem VMware environment. To start off, I need an Azure Migrate appliance. Now you can get the Azure Migrate appliance in two methods. You can simply download an image in an OVA or a VHD format, or you can use our installer and install the Azure Migrate components on any Windows server that you may already have in your data center. I'm going to start off by giving my on-prem appliance a name. I'm going to call it Demo Appliance. I can then generate the key and keep it handy. I will need it during the onboarding process. And then once the on-prem appliance is up and running, I'm ready to start onboarding from a discovery point of view. Now, again, if you've used Azure Migrate before, you will realize that the new appliance configuration manager experience is modern, it has been refreshed, and it has been designed so that you're successful with discovery the first time. You'll notice that the appliance performs a variety of prerequisite checks to ensure that you're connected to Azure, that the time on the server is in sync, and if you have the latest updates already installed. You then register with Azure Migrate by using the Azure Migrate project key that we generated in the previous step. Of course, you'll need to be logged into your Azure account so that you can pick the subscription, the resource group, and the project that you've created for your metadata repository. And then in a final step, you get to specify the discovery source that you're working with. This could be your VMware or your Hyper-V environment or your bare metal servers. Now, all of Azure Migrate's discovery, assessment, dependency mapping, and migration is agentless. We don't place any agents on your source environments to perform a discovery assessment or migration. However, we do need credentials to initiate the discovery process. For VMware, these are only read-only credentials that you need to provide. Credentials remain on premises and they are never sent to Azure. To perform software inventory and dependency mapping, you need to provide the credentials for your Windows and Linux virtual machines. These can be non-root credentials, and again, they stay on premises on your appliance and they're never transferred to Azure. Once I've specified my on-prem discovery details, when I come back to the Azure Migrate portal, I'll find my discovery already having been completed. Now, in this case, I have discovered over 56,000, in fact, 57,000 virtual machines in my project already. 37,000 of these virtual machines are VMware virtual machines. In fact, I've discovered an entire VMware data center. 20,000 have come from a CMDB import that I had already available. All right, with my discovery done, I'm ready to start creating an assessment. Now, creating an assessment is super straightforward. You simply click on Assess. And as a first step, you get to decide what are you assessing for. Now, of course, you can assess for Azure's infrastructure service. But I'm also happy to announce a preview. Now you can also perform an assessment for Azure VMware Solution. This is the VMware dedicated offering in Azure. For this demo, let's actually create an assessment for Azure VMware Solution or AVS. I'm going to give my assessment a name. Let's just call it Demo Assessment. In the next step, I get to pick the virtual machines that should be part of this assessment. Now you can create an assessment on top of 38,000 virtual machines at one time. That's larger than the limit of a VMware vCenter server environment. I have already created a group of all my virtual machines. I simply call it the DC exit group. This has roughly 37,000 virtual machines. I use the group and go next, and my assessment is going to get created. It's going to get created on 36,455 virtual machines. under the constraints of some default attributes. We'll look at those attributes once we have the report ready. Now, what I've already done is I've already generated a few different assessments that we can look at. Let's start off by looking at an assessment called DC Exit AVS. This is an assessment that I created on that DC Exit group. Now, you'll see that the assessment provides you a variety of information that helps you understand your migration readiness. You can see how many virtual machines were assessed. So in this case, 36,455 virtual machines were assessed. It tells me the readiness for these machines in terms of migration over to AVS. It also tells me how many AVS nodes I'll need for the migration. So I need 304 AVS nodes as per the projection. It tells me what my optimal CPU utilization is going to be. Now, this one is actually designed from a properties perspective to have the maximum packing density. So it's actually showing you almost 100% CPU utilization, but you can control what kind of headroom you need as part of your migration process. We'll also tell you what your projected cost is going to be. Now, this assessment, like I mentioned before, was computed in the context of some default attributes. If you need to change them, simply click on Edit Properties, and you can specify a set of attributes that help you make the decision better. Now, most customers that I work with routinely create multiple assessments. When it comes to Azure VM migration, they evaluate a variety of offers and pricing options. Customers evaluate if they should be using reserved instances, if they should be using 1-year or 3-year reserved instances, if they should be using hybrid benefit, if they should be performing a performance-based or right-sizing-based assessment, or they should be sticking with the base configuration of their on-prem VMs. Customers also evaluate what their EA pricing may look like. And these assessments can be performed as many times on the same set of VMs, and you get multiple reports that you can then compare with. However, I've also seen customers starting to leverage this important data with tools like Power BI to visualize these assessments and make their migration decision. So to make it easy for customers, I'm happy to announce the new Azure Migrate Power BI dashboard. This is going to be available through our GitHub repository as a sample Power BI dashboard that you can use and modify as you see fit. Now, what I've already done is I've created a set of assessments on top of my DC exit group and loaded them into Power BI. In fact, on our migration repository on GitHub, we will also include an automation that once you've performed a discovery, all variants of the assessment will get automatically computed for you. So you will not have to use the portal-based experience to create 10 or 12 different assessments. We will automatically queue in multiple assessments in your project using the utility. And once that is done, we will load that into Power BI and actually help you visualize this assessment. Now, as I mentioned, that the theme of this demo for me is to help you understand what you should be migrating first. So let's look at this Power BI and see what is it telling us. So of course, I can see I have roughly 37,000 VMs that were imported in through these multiple assessments. I also see that I have over 1,000 SQL servers. So that's a great pivot to get started. Looks like I have a good amount of SQL servers that I can work with in terms of my migration. I can see that my entire on-prem storage estate is roughly 150 terabyte. I'm running 40,000 cores, and I have around 6 terabytes of on-prem memory that I will be migrating over to Azure. Now, the one thing that really stands out for me in this Power BI report is that across all my Windows and Linux operating systems, around 45% of them are currently up for Windows end of support. Likely, these are either Windows Server 2003, Windows Server 2008, or Windows Server 2008 R2. Now, I should tell you that Windows Server 2008 and 2008 R2 are end of support. But if you migrate them over to Azure, you get 3 years of extended security updates for free. When combined with reserved instances and hybrid benefit, Azure is 1/5 the price of AWS when it comes to 2008 and 2008 R2 for Windows Server and SQL Server. That makes that the first great migration project that you can execute. And this Power BI is bringing that in focus for me. Tells me I have 45% of my VMs which can benefit from that offer today if I were to perform the migration. I can also see all the different combinations of my assessments have been pre-computed and loaded into this Power BI. And what the Power BI is also doing is telling me that based on how my resource utilization was on-prem, considering that I was only using 40% of my on-prem CPU and memory, the best option for me is going to be a performance-based or right-sizing-based assessment, which is going to be leveraging a 3-year reserved instances and Azure hybrid benefit, and what the monthly projected cost is going to be. Now, this is a great way for you to not just create multiple assessments, but also compare them in one view and start identifying your first set of migration projects. I'll put up the links when we recap this demo. This is available for you to use and extend as you see fit. Now let's jump to my second demo. In my second demo, I want to show you the capabilities for dependency mapping. This is the agentless dependency mapping feature for VMware. When you go to your discovered servers view, you can basically simply click on dependency analysis and starts adding servers that you want to perform a dependency analysis on. Now that the scale is 10 times, you can add 1,000 servers at one go. We will not place any agents on your virtual machines as part of the dependency mapping process. You can also visualize the software inventory that's already been discovered from your servers. Now, this is a great way to understand where are you running SQL, or maybe you're running Oracle somewhere. In fact, in my Power BI report, the 1000 SQL Server information came from this kind of data that's already available in Azure Migrate. Now, I can keep adding servers through the dependency mapping experience on the portal. And once I'm happy with the dependency mapping view, which gets generated after the first few hours of dependency data, I can simply click on export application dependency data, and a report will get generated for me with all of that information. Now, I realize that as we've enhanced the scale, you also need automation to be able to turn on dependency mapping at scale. So let's quickly look at a set of PowerShell commandlets that we are releasing today that will allow you to perform dependency mapping at scale. I've already executed them, but let's look at them on the screen. You can execute a simple commandlet like Azure Migrate discovered VMware VMs. This will simply download your entire discovered estate. So roughly 37,000 VMs will get downloaded. You can then compose the first set of 1,000 VMs that you want to perform dependency mapping on. Maybe it's those Windows Server 2008 VMs that are ready for migration. So you simply create a smaller file and pass it to Azure Migrate dependency mapping agentless enable. This will automatically turn on dependency mapping on those 1,000 VMs that are included in the input file. And then once sufficient time has passed, I recommend at least a day or 7 days based on how your application experiences seasonality and different connections to actually pull data that is high confidence. Once you have data available in Azure Migrate, simply execute get Azure Migrate dependency agentless. This will pull the entire dependency mapping data. We will also format it for Power BI so that you can, in addition to looking at it in the portal or in the CSV, you can also load it up into Power BI to evaluate the different network connections. That's going to come in handy when you have to decide which set of applications should be in which wave as you perform the migration process. In fact, I've already done that. What I have done is in the same Power BI that we are using for assessments, I have already loaded my Azure Migrate Agentless Dependency Mapping report, and I'm able to start visualizing the interconnectedness of my different application servers. I can actually process it based on different source servers, based on different target servers. I can exclude certain processes that I expect to be there, but not really consider as a dependency, or start excluding a certain set of ports that I may not want to look at. Now, this data and this network connection data comes in super handy when I have to figure out which set of servers are related, and am I ever at a risk of accidentally leaving behind a server that may be an important dependency. This data and these scripts are also going to be available on our GitHub repository, and when we recap the demo, I'll show you the links to those locations. Finally, in my third demo, I'm going to actually show you the migration features. So far we've done onboarding, we've performed a discovery, we've created an assessment, we saw how we can turn on at-scale dependencies. We even saw the new cool Power BIs that can help you visualize all this data. Now let's look at how you perform migrations. So I'm going to show you the new features in agentless VMware migration. Once you're ready to migrate, simply use Azure Migrate Server Migration. You don't need to onboard again. The same appliance that you created for your discovery, assessment, and dependency mapping also works for migration. Simply click on Replicate. As a first step, you need to pick where you're migrating out of. So I'm migrating out of VMware. Select the appliance that you're running. So I'm going to choose my appliance. On the next step, you get the option of either importing the assessment that has already been computed or performing a migration without the assessment data. Let's first do it without the assessment. So I'm going to say, no, I'll specify my migration settings manually. You can then select the virtual machine that you want to perform the migration for. So I'm going to quickly look up a UEFI VM. So as you can see, I have a VM called UEFI boot payroll web, which is now marked ready for Azure. This is that new Gen 2 migration feature that I was talking about. Since the Azure platform now supports Generation 2 virtual machines, Azure Migrate will also now allow you to perform the migration for those virtual machines. For the actual migration, let's actually apply the migration assessment because that's what's going to help you be efficient in terms of cost and resources. So I'm going to go back and change the option to apply my migration settings from my migration assessment. I'm going to pull the assessment for a set of VMs that are in a group called Fabric and Payroll. I'm going to select 3 VMs that are running the web tier of this application, Payroll VM Web 1, Web 2, and Web 3. And then when I start specifying the target details, I have the option of picking any subscription that I want to perform the migration to, the resource group where these virtual machines should land, the network that I want the machines to be connected to, and our newest feature, where I can specify the availability options for these virtual machines. So I'm going to actually specify that I want to place these virtual machines in an availability zone in Azure. So I specify that. I know I can benefit from hybrid benefits, so I'm going to select that. And now what you'll see is a new column in the compute screen. You can specify which availability zone in the target region should the VM be landing in. Now, since I have Web VM 1, 2, and 3, I'm going to actually place them in 3 different zones as part of the migration process so that I have absolute resilience for my application as part of my migration process. As I select the disks, the compute information is automatically going to be fetched from the assessment. The disk information is going to be automatically fetched. This is the right size data, which will make sure that my application is most optimal in terms of resource utilization. I simply click on review and start replication, and my VMs will start going into a replication. No agents will get installed for this replication process for VMware. Once the replication process completes, the first replication, which will take a little bit of time based on how big or small your VMs are, my VMs will enter a healthy replication state. I can then perform non-production impacting test migrations, actually validate the performance of my application in Azure. Once I have the confidence that Azure is the right platform for me, which it is, I can then schedule a cutover window and execute a migrate. During the migrate, we will automatically shut down your on-prem virtual machines, ensure that the final bits of data are replicated over to Azure so that you get absolutely zero data loss, and then initiate the migration. And of course, as part of the migration process, we will also install the Azure agent so that you can ensure management for your workloads the minute they land in Azure. So there you have it. These are your new different capabilities and features available in Azure Migrate, all the way from onboarding to discovery, assessment, dependency mapping, and migration. Let's quickly recap. In that first demo, I showed you our enhanced onboarding experience and the new Power BI capability that helps you evaluate multiple assessments to help understand what you should be migrating first. We saw how easy it is now to create a project, our enhanced onboarding experience with the appliance configuration manager, which has been refreshed and modernized. We saw how you can look at your discovered inventory, create an assessment for Azure VMware solution, and we saw the Power BI capability that can help you understand which projects are the ones that you should be executing first. And as promised, these resources are available through our GitHub repository. The links are on my slide. In the second demo, I showed you our at-scale agentless dependency mapping feature. Of course, you can use the Azure portal to turn on dependency mapping on 1,000 virtual machines and view the dependency data. But you can now also use our PowerShell utility to turn on dependency mapping, extract the report, and we'll also process it for Power BI. Once you have the report available, you can actually evaluate the network connections using a tool like Power BI to really understand which set of servers are interacting with each other. That's going to help you create high confidence migration waves so that you are very sure as part of your migration process. And finally, when it comes to migration, we saw cool new features. You can now migrate to availability zones. You can specify which zone your VMs should land in as part of the migration process. And we also saw that the ability to support migration for Generation 2 virtual machines with UEFI boot is now available as part of the migration process. Now, we saw a lot of stuff. Let's quickly recap the announcements. The ability to perform assessments for Azure VMware solution is now in preview. Our agentless dependency mapping feature is enhanced with 10 times the scale. The ability to perform assessments on top of CMDB data is now generally available, and so is the discovery and assessment for physical and bare metal servers or for VMs in AWS and GCP. For server migration, you now have support for availability zones, migration of generation 2 UEFI VMs. We've included PowerShell. We'll also install the Azure agent on your Windows and Linux virtual machines as part of the migration process. And you can now migrate VMs with large disks up to 32 terabytes with Azure Migrate server migration feature. Our web app scenario also has new features that support migration of Java web apps. And of course, Mover, which is our additional discovery and assessment tool, is also available through the Microsoft Solutions Assessment Program. But here's my one last thing. If you're looking to migrate .NET web apps over to containers that are managed by AKS, I have an exciting new preview for you. So if you're interested, the link is on the slide. Hit up that link and we'll onboard you to the preview that will help you migrate .NET web apps over to containers in AKS. All right, I appreciate you spending the time with us. I hope you found all of this information useful. We are constantly adding new features, and I strongly encourage you to try out Azure Migrate. You should be also checking out the migration skilling modules that we've curated that will help you accelerate your learning as part of the migration process. Thank you so much for joining us. Stay happy, stay safe.